pain, but her family was so embarrassed by her behavior that they conned her into going to see a psychiatrist. She had actually gotten over her hearing voices and so forth and had recovered from her drug addiction. But then once she got medicated with antipsychotics, she started hearing voices and so forth. And now they will not let her see her child, visit her child, unless she maintains her routine on medication. So she's being indirectly forced to take medication against her will. And the courts are totally in favor of medication, and the police and the Department of Human Services and the entire system is based on this false belief that medication is essential. And I was wondering what you suggest we can do about it.
Well, there's a guy named Jim Gottstein who's an attorney in Alaska, and he is changing the forced medication laws up there by challenging the evidence base. So he actually did the normal challenges. The normal challenges to forced medication cases are usually on civil rights, but you sort of have the civil right to do harm to yourself, so to speak. Jim Gottstein did a different attack. What he said is, you can't show that this, if you look at the evidence, that this is necessarily good for the person. So how does the state have the right to do something that is not necessarily good? And so this was really interesting. He litigated it in this way. And if you read that Supreme Court decision, in other words, it went to the highest court in Alaska, it's really fascinating. Because what the court concluded after reviewing all the evidence is that there was a reasonable debate as to whether these medications were necessarily good for the person. And because of that, the law now in Alaska says the provider has the responsibility to provide a less intrusive alternative, I think is what it reads. So that, by using the evidence, he challenged the law to really change the forced medication paradigm. He runs an organization, by the way, called Psych Rights. Some of you are probably familiar. Yes?
Thank you for speaking. It's been a pleasure. I was just wondering on some of these statistics that you're citing here, if you attribute, or how you attribute the evolution of the DSM, like the increase in diagnosis and increase in mental health patients from the 1950s.
Yeah, the disability numbers, right?
Right.
This is a great question. So how did we get from 360,000 people on disability to 4 million? And if you actually look at the NIH, they'll say that the number of people disabled by or having some degree of disability due to mental illness is around, you'll hear all the way up to 20 million, 15 million, 20 million. So there's a couple of things going on just in terms of, obviously diagnosis, the boundaries have expanded dramatically, right? And so if you look at the number of categories, they keep going up and up, and even the boundaries for individual categories keep getting loosened. And so that's one thing that's going on. And one of the things that does happen, if you bring people once you diagnose them, and on medications, well, some of those patients aren't going to do well. And so you do have the capacity for some people ending up sort of more with more problems long term. But let me just focus, I think, if we look at the bipolar group, because this is really where the story happens. So bipolar used to be 1 in 3,000, 1 in 5,000, and outcomes were pretty good. 85% working long term, 75%, something like that, 70%. Today, as I said, it's 1 in 50, and in terms of people diagnosed, and outcomes only about a third work long term, and I think the number of people, they say that it's now the 6th leading cause of disability in the United States, bipolar use. So how do we get so many numbers? Well, if you look at the gateways to bipolar, here's what's going on. About a third of the people who end up with that diagnosis have been using illicit drugs prior to the time. Marijuana, LSD, other drugs. And that's obviously caused some destabilization. That's one gateway. A second big gateway is antidepressants. So if you look at people on antidepressants today that begin with a major diagnosis of major depression, unipolar depression, it used to be, before they were being put on antidepressants, the conversion to bipolar occurred at about a rate of 2.5% per year. Let me just finish this and then I'll ask you. Now, once you're on an antidepressant, it occurs at a rate, it's a threefold higher rate, it's about 7.7% per year, Yale researchers said in 2004. So there's a greatly increased risk of converting to bipolar, such that today somewhere between 20 to 40% of people on antidepressants long-term convert to bipolar. And if you look at a group of bipolar patients today, like, have you ever heard of the support group MDDA? It's manic depressive, I forget exactly what it sounds like. They did a survey recently of that population, and 60% had their first manic episode after being put on the antidepressants. So that's a big iatrogenic pathway. If you look what's happening also with kids, how come we have it's both antidepressants and stimulants that are really stirring this iatrogenic pathway. And then finally, we've just expanded the boundaries, what you're talking about of bipolar illness. So it used to be you had to be hospitalized for both. Now you don't even have to be hospitalized, in other words, you have to be hospitalized for depression and for mania. Now you don't have to be hospitalized for either. And in some instances, if you're just too moody, I think you get this diagnosis. So that's why we end up with this 1 in 50. So it does play into the DSM. But it also plays in the DSM if you're expanding your use of antidepressants in this sort of willy-nilly way, you're really creating this sort of long-term flood of bipolar patients. And it's real clear that's what's going on. Iatrogenic means medication caused. Well, okay. In the back, and then we'll come to short, because he had his hand up, with the hand. Yeah.
One person there, yeah, actually.
Oh, sorry.
I'm an amputee who was given a great deal of terrible medicine. I am an amputee who was given a lot of pain medicine. I'm also bipolar. And I find that the use of marijuana has a very effective use because it shifts my attention away from the issues of like bipolar and chronic pain, and is very effective. What does marijuana play in this soup of activity?
Really get you in trouble here. No, that's right. Really, I've only looked at it as a gateway to bipolar. So, for example, what will happen is, especially sometimes in kids, you really do see this. There have been studies that of kids that end up with a bipolar diagnosis, many of them have been, smoking marijuana regularly. I know exactly what you're saying. Some people find marijuana very helpful in many different ways. And that's clearly true. The only part of the research I've done is looking at, the gateways to bipolar. So I don't really have a good response in terms of that as a therapy. Okay, but in terms of as a painkiller, I think people know pretty well that it's a pretty effective painkiller. I think that's true. And the other thing you're talking about, in terms, it's not an effective painkiller?
I don't think it's an effective painkiller. I think it changes your point of attention.
Okay, well, you know better than me. I just know that some people in chronic pain like to use marijuana. I mean, that's one story. But I don't really know much about that, unfortunately. Yes?
Thank you for coming and sharing all your information. Excuse me. I'm probably like the poster child for the whole thing that you just explained, from being diagnosed with depression, being put on Paxil, misdiagnosed, bipolar. I have psychosis now with akathisia, tardive dyskinesia, and some other things that happen with me. So I've been through that, and now I'm also diagnosed with, I think, 13 mental illnesses. So I'm also a United States veteran also. So that's just given me all these great diagnoses. But in this path of my own going down and up, I found that I'm on a healing path, and there's a lot of great things out there. What I found for healing purposes, a lot of cognitive, behavioral, emotional, belief therapy programs. And I guess I was wondering, with your findings of what you've been looking through and the programs at work, are a lot of those based on that kind of stuff and empowering and teaching people how to deal with this stuff? Because that's what I found that's helped me to heal and to get a hold of some of this stuff.
In the solutions section, the cognitive behavior research literature is almost its own book, and psychotherapy is almost its own book. And so what I really did in solutions is to look at sort of big picture government solutions, so that